Jaden, I don't really feel like we've talked enough about Fable 5. Obviously, you and I sort of talked behind the scenes before we do a lot of these things, and we felt like it was pretty well covered, I think. But you and I have both been testing it. It's, at the time of filming this podcast, it's coming to an end where people got like free access to it, essentially. And Jaden, just like for the last, I don't know, week or something like that, my timeline has been blowing up of people saying, everybody lock yourself in a room, go to Fable, define a problem. And it sort of sounds like the same as everything else. And everything is like, oh my gosh, like, let's go crazy for Fable and don't stop using it until, your eyeballs start to bleed and stuff like that. Is that what you found too? Because I got into it. I didn't burn through all my credits, but I was using it to test it out on really big problems. So the questions that I have, Jaden, for you kind of coming in, because you said that you burned through your credits almost instantly. So wondering, first of all, your own experience, because part of the thing I appreciate about talking to you on this podcast is that it feels to me sometimes a little more accessible for folks who are not coders and people who are not thinking like, oh my gosh, I built a whole new back end, blah, blah, blah. But just like, what would the average person use it for? Because there's going to come a time, Jaden, where Fable 5 is going to sound like old news. It's going to be super cheap, everything like that. But now here we are on the frontier. So what were either you using it for? What were you excited about it for? Were you excited about it?
Yeah, there's a couple interesting things. So for me in particular, I did use it. I used up all my credits in like a day or two because it uses 2 times the credits and they only give you like 50% of your total credits they'll allow you to use for that. On July 7th, they moved it off of the subscription plan. So you no longer get access to it with your Claude Max subscription or whatever else. And you have to use it via API because it's so expensive. They're like, well, we'll just make, if people really want it that bad, you got to pay the API costs for it. And so, yeah, it'll be expensive, and that's how you can get access to the quote unquote best model. What's interesting, so I think they gave it to everyone for like a week just as like a taste test, like, okay, here you go, play around with it, and then we're pulling it off. I'm sure at some point it'll come back. What I've noticed a lot of these AI models do, OpenAI was kind of known for this in particular, is like they'll come up with the incredible model. It's insanely expensive. I don't know if we've seen this exact play where they go API only, but what will typically happen with these models that are like super expensive, super crazy. We saw this with like a lot of the high powered, GPT-5 models, for example. OpenAI figures out some ways to kind of tone it down, make it less compute intensive, and then it's a little bit easier to like actually mass deploy that for everyone to go and use. And so I'm sure at some point Fable 5 will get a little bit optimized and then we'll bring it back. And sometimes by optimized, that just means it gets like nerfed. You give it less compute. We know that there's kind of a compute bell curve where, well, not bell curve, but a compute line where the more power, the more compute you give to these models, the better your response is. And if you've seen on like Claude, if you've used like their app, there's kind of a toggle on like Claude Code, or even I think Cowork might have it too, but definitely Claude Code, where you can toggle back how powerful Opus 4.8 is or Fable 5 and give it like, it's still called like max, and then there's like beyond max, there's like turbo, extreme, insanity, like they just whatever. They like have these like different levels that are funny, right? You'd expect max to be the max, but no, that's like kind of the mid level. Anyways, so I imagine we'll get it back at some point. Maybe it'll get force locked into like a max mode, like a mid-level mode, and won't let you go all the way. Okay, all that to say though, there is some real benefit to their maximum power of the model. And I think a lot of people I actually heard say like, hey, I tried Fable 5 and it felt basically like Opus 4.8. Did you get that experience, Connor? Like, what was your experience with that out of curiosity?
For me, it was a mixed bag, so the thing that I put it on over the weekend was, so we are a company, AI Mindset, right? And like we have a whole system of working with organizations, right? We kind of like do it by leadership levels and things like that. But one of the things, Jaden, and this is probably too much information to be sharing behind the scenes here, but I'm trying to sort of think like, okay, so what is like transformation in companies today? Do you know what I mean? Like we've been doing this. I was part of a business school, obviously, for a dozen years or so. And transformation looked different across every organization, but it was always like it was always a particular kind of transformation. Like, was it a digital transformation or an operational transformation, whatever? Transformation means different things to different companies based on what they're trying to transform from and into. And with AI transformation, it's something that's thrown around a lot. And so I was just doing a lot of kind of big thinking around that and putting just tons of our documents. And by the way, guys, just as I don't mean to do tips and tricks here, but obviously we have in our company, we have a really big Google Drive of just tons and tons and tons of stuff. And when you just kind of pointed at it, it just AI, I don't care how smart it is, doesn't know what the important stuff in there is. And so I spent a lot of time, probably hours really, just kind of going through and creating a new folder where it's like, okay, these are our real foundational documents. Obviously, we kind of had something like that, but I wanted to kind of take a lot of pieces because we create a lot of content. We do a lot of different kinds of workshops. I'm like, okay. And I pointed Fable at that and said, what's kind of a new way of looking at this? And it was one of those things where it wasn't AI-ish to me in a
Mm-hmm.
weird way. Do you know what I mean? Like it didn't smack like AI in a way that everything else tends to, at least a little bit. And what I mean by that is two things. First of all, it kind of tries to AI tends to try to sound smart over whether it actually is smart. That's number one.
Yeah.
And the second thing that it does is it over indexes on things that you explain to it. So what I mean by that is if I'll say, right, but it's not really this, it's more like this. And then, I don't care how smart Claude or anything else is, it tends to incorporate that into the answer, if that makes sense. It's like, and by the way, it's not this. And I'm like, right, but that person isn't going to care. That's our own internal thinking. And
Yeah.
I think what Fable did really well was take a big strategic question of like, what is I don't mean the future of this, but like, what does AI transformation actually look like given all these parameters, given what we do, given our approach to this, which is a little different with companies? And it actually really thought about it really carefully and gave me some really helpful paradigms in a way that I guess I didn't experience it as necessarily smarter. What I experienced was that what would take me with anything from, let's call it Claude 4.5 and after, those models could get me there, but it really took a lot of back and forth. And I felt like Claude just kind of cut through and understood what I was talking about very quickly. And that's that was. So again, I know people have benchmarks. That was just the vibe that I was getting from it, but that came from working with it for hours and hours and hours. And Jaden, it kind of makes me think about, um, when you have sort of somebody great working with you, when you have a new entry level person. Jaden has a company, has had companies in the past where you bring somebody on, and Jaden, this is especially interesting for you, I think, because for a lot of people that you work with, when you have like virtual people, you have to sort of say like, hey, here's the process, here's what you do here, I want you to do it this way, and we want consistency and all that kind of stuff. And then you hire a higher level person. I know some of the people you work with who are kind of like higher level thinkers, obviously. For them, you can say, hey, I'm trying to do this. So for me, like, we have our, my colleague Robert out in the UK, and I do not tell him what to create. I'm just like, hey, Robert, this is what we're trying to do. And he goes off and he comes back with something way better than I ever could have come up with. And I feel like that's what everybody has been saying about Fable. It's like, forget giving it tasks, give it a goal and let it figure it out. But I don't know what your experience was on all that.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just intrinsically a better model than 4.8. But I actually did hear from a lot of people that tried it out and were like, hey, like it basically feels the same as like 4.8. I don't know what really the difference is. And I guess it depends on what task you give it, right? Because if you give Fable 5, rewrite this title to this subject line in this email, it's going to give you the same as whatever. I mean, there's only so much optimization that goes, I know it's rocket science, guys, but there's only so much optimization that goes into a lot of the tasks we do. So you give it a simple task, it's going to do it just like Opus 4.8. It's not going to, but if you give it something a lot more complex, and I found if you turned up the dial to like give it the maximum amount of compute, then it could get really hard stuff done, and it just absolutely gobbled your tokens, which sucked. But I used it for some interesting tasks. One in particular, I have an app that I'm building, and it's a Bible study app, and there's widgets. So it on the home screen of like iPhones and Androids, you can have like on like your screen next to all your apps, you can have these widgets, and I wanted there to be like Bible verses, but I wanted you to be able to like change the background color and change the fonts and kind of customize them. Anyways, with 4.8, I spent 2 days. And when I say I spent, like I did normal work and it's kind of on the side of my laptop and I'm like yelling at it every like 10 minutes to try a new thing. I spent 2 days with Opus 4.8 trying to get the widgets to work. And it sounds like the most simple thing, but it's actually really complex because those widgets, they only can have, they're like their own separate app, basically of a spinoff of a normal iOS app. They can only have a certain, like be a certain size. There's like all of these, like when they show an image, it has to be like really super compressed. Anyways, they can only refresh every 4 hours. There's like all these like weird rules to these like widgets, whatever. Okay. So it's just not super common. And Opus 4.8 really struggled 2 days, and it could not get me to be able to like customize those widgets, basically, which was so annoying. So anyways, I got Fable as soon as Fable 5 came on, I was like, okay, I got to try it. Turn it up to max. set it loose, and in like 2 hours, which it's hilarious, it took 2 hours, but it took 2 hours. It still struggled, but it got it and it made it perfect and it's customizable and it's super cool and it's everything I ever wanted. And I would like push it to like things I'd tried so hard before that were like just repeatedly not possible. Like I felt like with Opus 4.8 and older models, I would get to a point, oh man, with Lovable, this was the worst. And not trying to take a shot at Lovable, but like they often will pull in other models that are not the best, like faster Gemini models or whatever. Not a shot at Gemini. Wow, I'm roasting everybody right now. But anyways, I would be building tools with Lovable and I would try so hard to get something done. It would fail so many times. I'd say, scrap the feature. We're moving on. I'm just going to do something different. That's not that important. With Fable 5, you do not have to scrap the feature. If you can think of it, if you can imagine it, Fable 5 could do it. Now, super expensive, gobbles up tokens. And that's one example. I did another example where I had iOS app and I, for the same Bible study app, it's got an iOS app. I spent a lot of time making it amazing and perfect and releasing it, but I didn't have an Android, and a lot of people were complaining about not having an Android. So I was like, okay, make an Android app. It's really hard to just say like, when you spend like 2 weeks making one thing and you're like, okay, now make it for Android. It's going to take you another 2 weeks, but like I don't even have an Android to test it. It wasn't my dream to do. Anyways, Opus 4.8 struggled with it. Fable 5 got the whole thing finished and done and fixed all the bugs and got it straightened out. So it's like the finishing, maybe it's like, oh, maybe people might be like, oh, it's only like 10, 15% better or something like that. But it's like, it makes a big difference. An app that looks 15% more polished and 15% more functional. And, the extra 15% actually makes it work versus like almost get you there. So I felt like Fable 5 is like, it gets you there and it actually works. And for software development stuff anyways.
No, but I think that what you're saying there is important because it's sort of like, and we can maybe do another episode on like, Copilot agents and stuff like that, just because I feel like everything that we learn, I think a lot of folks in our audience are sort of like also learning alongside that. But I think with Fable, I think where it really shines is building. And it's in the same way that you can have sort of like two brilliant thinkers, but it's in a way, it's a matter of like, well, which one do you think is better? There's not really an objective better or worse. This is why I don't really do a lot with memory and stuff like that. Like it's because my thinking on this stuff changes a lot. And where I got to say like ChatGPT and even Gemini, I love Gemini, but I use Gemini as default. But like where Gemini sometimes falls down for me is it keeps calling in like other things I've talked about in the past. I'm like, do not talk about that. Whereas Claude tends to never make that mistake, which I love. But I would say that with Fable, it's really the differences in building. So if you guys have something to build, and let me remind you of one thing. The hardest thing sometimes is about like building with AI is knowing what to build. I'll say it again. The hardest thing about building with AI is knowing what to build. Once you sort of like figure that out, then you're off and running. But I think that that's where Fable really shines as far as everything I've seen, which is like it actually builds things better rather than just thinks better. And I think that's where it's going to sort of like really make its mark.
100%. Let's wrap this up. But you had said one thing that I thought was really interesting, which was that you don't like it when ChatGPT and Gemini remember things about you. And I find, so like from a personal perspective, when I'm using ChatGPT, I kind of want it to know like some stuff about me. It gives me some better perspectives, whatever. But from a business perspective, I'm actually the same way with Claude, where a lot of people talk about like, hey, I'm making like these skills so it can remember my workflows and yada, yada. Dude, I never make skills for Claude because every time I make them, they change like a week later. I'm like, okay, the way I was doing this was horrible. This was bad. We're changing this whole part of the workflow. Anyways, when you're constantly optimizing, and sometimes it's hard to go figure out where in the skill file to go change it or update it or whatever. I'll look at like an old skill I made like 2 months ago and I'm like, oh my gosh, like that was... Anyways, everything's changing so fast, but I know that's not for everyone. If you can automate stuff, it's great, but it's kind of funny just how much stuff changes. Anyways, Fable's great. Go give it a try if you have not already. It's worth it if you got a really big problem that you really got to push on. But thank you guys so much for tuning into the podcast. Listen, guys, this is the closest we have ever been to getting 200 reviews on the podcast. We're at 184 reviews right now. If you have not left a review already, guys, we are so close. We need 16 more and we will cross into the double 200 level. This is something we have dreamed about. Connor said he's dreamed about this since he was a young boy. So if you could make his childhood dreams come true and get us to 200 reviews, oh my gosh, we would be so grateful to you. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. We'll catch you in the next episode.